The great hall of the twins was full of laughter, music, and the smell of roasted meat. The banners of House Frey and House Stark hung side by side, a sign of peace, or so everyone believed. Robb Stark, the king in the north, sat with his new bride Talisa beside him, speaking warmly with his mother, Lady Catelyn. The war had taken much from them, but tonight felt like a small step toward healing. But under the smiles and toasts, danger waited. Roose Bolton, Lord of the Dreadfort, sat quietly, his pale eyes as cold as ever. He had already chosen betrayal, already whispered to the Lannisters, already sharpened the knives that would end the young wolf's reign. The Red Wedding was meant to be his victory, his path to power. Only this time Robb Stark was not blind. It began with whispers. Days before the wedding, one of Robb's loyal scouts, disguised as a servant, overheard Frey men speaking of locked gates and hidden crossbows. The words carried urgency, and the scout risked his life to bring them back to Lord Stark. At first, Robb wanted to believe it was just drunken talk, but his mother's eyes told him otherwise. Catelyn had always been suspicious of Walder Frey. "Trust your gut, Robb," she had urged. "Do not put your family's lives in the hands of men like the Freys and the Boltons." Robb listened. Quietly he gave orders. His bannermen were to keep their swords near at all times, and his direwolf, Grey Wind, was never to be caged. His uncle Edmure's wedding to Roslyn Frey would go forward, but Robb would not walk blindly into a slaughter. The night of the feast came. Music filled the hall as the bedding ceremony began, and guests laughed as Edmure was carried to his chamber. Then the doors slammed shut. A hush fell over the room. The musicians struck up the tune, "The Rains of Castamere." It was the signal. Walder Frey raised his hand. Knives were drawn. Crossbows were lifted. Roose Bolton's men prepared to strike. But in that same instant, Robb shouted a command, "Now!" The Starks and their allies leapt to their feet, weapons flashing. Grey Wind burst into the hall, tearing into Frey guards before they could loose their bolts. Catelyn flipped a table, shielding Talisa and herself as arrows rained down. The hall, meant to be a slaughterhouse, became a battlefield. Bolton cursed under his breath. His plan was crumbling. He charged at Robb, blade in hand, but the young wolf met him with steel. Their swords clashed, sparks flying, the air thick with blood and smoke. "You would betray your king." Robb snarled, driving Bolton back with furious strikes. "You were never my king," Bolton hissed. "The Lannisters offer more than your stubborn honor ever could." But Bolton had underestimated Robb Stark. Battle had sharpened the young lord into a true commander, and his rage burned with the memory of his father's execution, of Winterfell's fall, of every betrayal the North had suffered. With one swift motion, Robb disarmed Roose and drove his sword through the traitor's chest. Silence swept the hall for a heartbeat as Bolton collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Then the fight roared back to life. By the time dawn broke, the floor of the twins was painted red. Hundreds lay dead, Frey men, Bolton men, even Stark bannermen. But Robb and his family stood alive. Walder Frey was dragged before the young wolf, trembling with rage and fear. "You break guest right. You plot murder under your own roof," Robb said coldly, his sword still wet with blood. "The North remembers Lord Frey, and so will the Riverlands." Walder spat and cursed, but it did not save him. By Robb's order, he was hanged from the very hall where he planned his treachery. The Freys who surrendered were taken as prisoners. Those who fought were cut down. The Red Wedding had been meant to kill the Starks, but instead it became their greatest triumph. News of Bolton's death and Frey's downfall spread quickly through the realm, reaching Winterfell, the Vale, and even King's Landing. The Lannisters had gambled on betrayal, but their move had failed. Robb Stark was still king in the north, stronger than before, more dangerous than ever, and for the first time in a long while. Hope stirred in the hearts of Northerners, but war was far from over, because Tywin Lannister would never forgive such defiance. The morning after the bloody feast, the twins were silent. Smoke rose from the broken hall, bodies lay in heaps, and the stench of death clung to the air. What was meant to be Robb Stark's grave had instead become his battlefield of triumph. But victory carried its own weight. Robb stood outside with grey wind at his side, staring at the river. His clothes were torn and stained, his hands sticky with blood that was not only his enemies'. Many of his own men had fallen. He could still hear their last cries in his head. The Red Wedding had been avoided, but not without cost. Beside him, Lady Catelyn moved like a ghost, her eyes hard and tired. She had seen her son fight Roose Bolton with the fury of a king, and she had seen him win. Yet she also knew what was coming. Killing Bolton and Frey would shake the whole realm. Word will spread quickly, she told Robb, her voice quiet but sharp. Tywin Lannister will not let this stand. He will come for you with fire and steel. Robb nodded. He had already thought of that. Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, was not the kind of man to forgive insults, let alone the death of his allies. The war was far from over. It was only turning bloodier. The surviving lords of the north and Riverlands gathered in the courtyard. Great men with weary faces. Great John Umber, Rickard Karstark's sons, Blackfish Tully, and many more. They looked at Robb not with pity, but with respect. He had faced betrayal, and had not only survived, but crushed it. The traitors are dead, Great John shouted, raising his sword. The North remembers. Cheers rose, filling the morning air. For the first time since his father's death, Robb felt the fierce unity of his people. The betrayal that was meant to break him had instead bound the North tighter together. Still, Robb knew victory was only the beginning. He could not remain at the Twins, surrounded by enemies. He gathered his council in the main hall. His mother, Edmure Tully, Brynden Blackfish, and his closest bannermen. Maps were spread across the table, candles burning low as they spoke of war. The Lannisters will march soon, Blackfish warned. Tywin is ruthless, and he will not wait. He will send ravens across the realm, painting us as oath-breakers. They will call me the Butcher of the Twins, Robb admitted grimly. But we have the truth. The phrase broke guessed right. They drew first blood. Let the realm hear that. Catelyn looked at her son with quiet pride. He was no longer a boy playing at war. The boy who had left Winterfell was gone. In his place stood a king hardened by betrayal. Edmure, nervous as always, cleared his throat. What of the Riverlands? My people are weary, cousin. They've borne the Lannisters' fire, and now the phrase treachery. Robb placed a hand on Edmure's shoulder. The Riverlands will not fight alone. I will not abandon you. The Starks and Tullys stand together. It was decided the army would march north first, to rally their strength and secure Winterfell. From there, they would decide their next strike against the Lannisters. The Frey's castles would be seized, their bannermen forced to bend the knee or face destruction. The Boltons' lands would be stripped and given to loyal houses. Before they left, Robb gave his direwolf free rein over the Twins. Grey wind prowled the halls, his teeth flashing whenever a Frey servant looked too bold. It was a warning. This castle belonged to the Starks now. The march was slow, burdened by wounded men and wagons full of prisoners. But everywhere they passed, small folk came out of their homes to see the young wolf. When they saw he lived, that he had avenged betrayal, they cheered and cried. The North remembered indeed. In Winterfell, word of Robb's survival reached faster than ravens could fly. The people whispered that the gods themselves had protected him, that the young wolf could not be killed by steel or treachery. His legend grew with each tale. How grey wind had torn out the throats of Frey guards, how Robb himself had slain Bolton in single combat. Some even called him the Iron Wolf, a king who could not be broken. But in King's Landing the news was like poison. Tywin Lannister received the raven in his solar, his golden eyes narrowing as he read of Roose Bolton's death. Around him his council stirred nervously. They call him the young wolf, Tywin said coldly, but he is not a pup anymore. He is a wolf grown, and wolves grown are more dangerous, Cersei sneered. Let him bark. Winter is cold, but lions rule the south. We will crush him yet, but Tyrion, ever the careful one, frowned. If Bolton and Frey are dead, that means Robb has silenced his traitors. The North will rally even stronger. And if the Riverlands follow him, the Lannisters will have war on two fronts. Tywin silenced them all with a look. The boy must be broken, not just beaten. We will burn his lands, starve his people, and bleed his army until he bends the knee or dies." Back in the north, Robb prepared for exactly that storm. He sent ravens to the Vale, reminding Lysa Arryn of her blood ties to the Starks. He sent envoys to the Iron Islands, though he trusted them little. He even considered reaching out to Stannis Baratheon, though the thought of bending to another king made his blood boil. At night, when the fires burned low, Robb walked alone with Grey Wind. He thought of his father's honor, of Jon Snow at the Wall, of Arya and Sansa lost to him. Every step of this war was costing him more than he could bear, but he had no choice. The North had been betrayed once. It would not happen again. And if Tywin Lannister thought the young wolf would kneel, he was gravely mistaken. The road to Winterfell was long and scarred by war. Villages still smoked from raids, fields lay blackened, and the people walked with hollow eyes. Robb rode at the head of his column, Grey Wind padding close, while banners of the direwolf and trout fluttered above. To the small folk, it was a sight of hope, the king who lived, the king who avenged treachery. But Robb saw only the heavy price still to come. Each night around the campfires, his men told stories of the Red Wedding that never was. Some swore Robb had known every step of the Frey treachery, that he had walked into their trap only to spring his own. Others claimed Grey Wind had sensed betrayal and warned his master in time. The truth mattered less than the tale. In war, legends were often sharper than swords. Lady Catelyn, however, remained cautious. She watched her son with the wary eyes of a mother who had seen too many victories turn hollow. "We may have beaten Bolton and Frey," she told him one evening, "but Tywin is not like them. He does not fight battles he cannot win. He will twist the realm against us before his swords even march," Robb agreed. That was why ravens had already flown from his hand. To Lysa Arryn in the Vale, he reminded her of her duty to House Tully, to Balon Greyjoy. Though it stung his pride, he offered gold and spoils if the Ironborn would turn their longships against the Lannisters instead of the North. To Stannis Baratheon, he sent a careful message. Two kings might yet strike together if their enemies were the same. Yet even as he played the game of alliances, Robb knew Winterfell had to be his first step. His home was more than stone walls, it was a symbol. If Winterfell rose again, the North would stand unshaken. If it remained broken, his crown would feel hollow. By the time they crossed into the Wolfswood, scouts brought word that Winterfell lay in ruin, as it had after Theon's betrayal and Ramsay Snow's flames. The castle's once proud towers were blackened, the gates half-burned, its courtyards filled with ashes. But worse than the ruin was the silence. When Robb entered his father's hall again, the weight of ghosts pressed heavy. He remembered sitting here as a boy, listening to Eddard Stark speak of justice. He remembered Arya's laughter echoing from the stairways, Bran chasing through the corridors, Jon standing quiet at his father's side. Now it was only stone and memory, but Robb was no boy. He stood where his father once had, his sword laid across the table, and declared, "Winterfell is not dead. It breathes through us. It will rise again. And while I live, no Lannister, no traitor will hold it." His bannermen cheered, voices echoing through the empty halls. Already, masons and carpenters were set to work. The people of the North flocked back to their ruined heart, carrying timber, tools, and food. To them, rebuilding Winterfell was as much an act of defiance as wielding a sword. Still, shadows lingered. News reached Robb that Balon Greyjoy had died suddenly, leaving his daughter Yara and son Victarion squabbling for the Seastone chair. The Iron Islands were in chaos, which meant no help or harm would come from them soon. But in the Vale, Lysa Arryn gave no answer. She hid behind her high mountains and her fear, unwilling to risk her armies, even for kin. Worse still, letters arrived from the south. Tywin Lannister had already begun his countermove. His gold bought tongues in every court, spreading the tale that Robb Stark was no hero but a butcher. He claimed Robb had murdered guests under his own roof, twisting the truth of the Red Wedding. The realm's lords might not know what to believe, but the stain of broken guest right was dangerous. Catelyn read the letters with a frown. Your honor is being turned into a weapon, Robb. If too many believe this, no lord will risk joining your cause." Robb clenched his jaw. "Then I will not ask them to believe words. I will make them see with their eyes. When we march south again, every battle we win will be proof that the Starks do not break oaths. We avenge them. As Winterfell's repairs grew, so too did Robb's plans. He ordered the forges lit again, smiths working day and night to craft armor and blades. He met with Karstarks, Umbers, and Manderleys, swearing fresh oaths of loyalty. Each lord pledged men, food, and coin. The north was bleeding, but it was not broken. One night, as snow began to fall heavy on the castle, Catelyn found her son sitting before the heart tree in the Godswood. He had not spoken of faith in years, but now his lips moved in quiet prayer. She stood silently listening. When he rose, his eyes were steady. "I've asked the old gods for strength, for wisdom, for the courage father had." He turned to her, his jaw set. "I am not him, mother. I know that. But I must be more than a Stark. I must be the North itself." It was then the first true news of Tywin's march reached Winterfell. The Lannisters had gathered their banners. Thousands of spears, knights in golden armor, and sellswords bought with coin were already moving. Worse still, the Frey survivors had sworn vengeance, and though broken, they whispered promises of revenge from every shadow. Winter was coming fast, but so was war, and this time the young wolf was ready. Winterfell stood again, but it was far from whole. Its walls were patched with timber, its courtyards filled with builders and blacksmiths rather than soldiers. Yet for the north, the castle's revival was a beacon. It told every farmer, every warrior, every bannerman that the Starks still ruled, that the young wolf had not been broken. But Robb Stark knew hope alone would not hold the north. Word reached him daily. Tywin Lannister's armies had left Harrenhal, spreading like fire across the Riverlands. Villages were being torched, grain stolen, and every lord who bent the knee to House Stark was punished. Already, Edmure Tully sent ravens begging for aid. One cold morning, Robb gathered his council in the repaired Great Hall. The map of Westeros lay before them, its surface marked with pebbles for armies and knives for rivers. Catelyn sat near her son, silent but watchful, while the Blackfish pointed at the trident with a scarred finger. "If we sit here in Winterfell while Tywin burns the Riverlands," the Blackfish said, "our allies will be destroyed one by one. By the time we march, we'll have no Riverlords left to march with." Great John Umber slammed his fist on the table. "Then let's ride south. Let's gut the lions where they stand, and show them what northern steel tastes like." But Robb was quiet. He studied the map, his lips pressed tight. He remembered his father's words, "A lord must be wise as well as brave." The Blackfish was right, yet charging south too quickly could leave Winterfell open to fresh betrayal. He could not forget Theon's treachery or the Bolton's schemes. "Winterfell must not fall again," Robb finally said. "If we leave it unguarded, we invite another knife in the dark. But we cannot abandon the Riverlands either, so we split our strength." It was a dangerous choice, but Robb made it anyway. He commanded that a third of his men remain in the north, under the Karstarks and Manderleys, to guard Winterfell and keep the coast secure. The rest would march with him to relieve River Run and strike at Tywin's forces. Catelyn frowned. "Dividing your army leaves both weaker. Tywin will not make that mistake." "I know," Robb answered. "But Tywin does not know the north as I do. Winter itself will fight for us. Snow, distance, hunger, those are allies lions cannot tame." So it was decided. Within days the banners were gathered, and the march south began. The cold winds followed them, but the men sang loudly, their voices carrying across the frosted trees. They sang of the Red Wedding turned red with Frey blood, of Bolton's death, and of wolves tearing lions apart. As they crossed the neck, they met the first whispers of Lannister cruelty. Villages burned to ash, children wandering hungry, women crying over dead husbands. Robb stopped his march to bury the bodies and feed the survivors from his own stores. To his soldiers, this was more than kindness. It was proof that their king was not like Tywin, who ruled through fear. Robb ruled through loyalty. At River Run, Edmure greeted them with tears in his eyes. His lands had been raided for months. his people driven to despair. But when Robb rode into the gates, the banners of the trout and direwolf together, hope returned. The council of war was called again. Reports showed that Tywin's main host lay camped near Harrenhal, too strong to attack head-on. But smaller bands of lions prowled the countryside, burning and pillaging. Robb struck at them first. The young wolf returned to his old ways. Swift strikes, ambushes, sudden raids. His riders moved like shadows, harassing Lannister foragers, cutting off supply lines, and vanishing into forests before reinforcements could arrive. At night, the cries of lions echoed across the Riverlands, but their prey was gone before dawn. One victory followed another. At the stone mill, Robb's men lured a Lannister column onto thin ice and sent dozens to watery graves. At Pennytree, his archers rained death from hidden ridges, leaving the ground carpeted with golden cloaks. With every skirmish, the legend of the young wolf grew stronger again, but Tywin was no fool. Each defeat only sharpened his anger. In King's Landing, Cersei raged, demanding Robb's head. But Tywin's eyes were cold as winter steel. He fights like a wolf, yes, Tywin admitted to his council. But wolves starve when the herd is gone. We will not chase him. We will burn his land, bleed his people, and wait for winter to finish him. And so Tywin began his cruelest move yet. He sent word to the Frey remnants, promising vengeance if they struck Robb's supply lines. He poured gold into the hands of sellswards, swelling his army beyond what the Riverlands could match. And quietly he reached to the south, seeking an alliance with the Reach to crush the wolf for good. Back at Riverrun, Robb felt the pressure tightening like a noose. His victories in the field brought glory, but his stores ran thinner with each passing week. His men were growing hungry, their armor rusting in the wet. Worse, winter's snow was falling harder now, making roads treacherous and rivers freezing over. One night, Robb walked the battlements with the Blackfish. "Every victory feels smaller," Robb confessed. "We kill their men, yet more come. We starve them, yet they buy more food. How do you fight a man who has endless coin?" The Blackfish looked out across the Trident. "You don't beat Tywin by playing his game. You beat him by making him bleed where gold cannot save him. Find his weakness, Robb, and strike it like a wolf at the throat." Robb thought long and hard. Tywin's weakness was not only armies or gold. It was pride, it was alliances, it was the illusion that lions could not be touched. And somewhere in that pride, Robb swore he would sink his teeth, but even as he planned, fate was moving faster than his sword. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen was gathering strength. In the south, Stannis Baratheon still brooded over his flames. And in the far, frozen north, darker things stirred beyond the wall. Robb Stark had survived betrayal. He had rebuilt Winterfell. He had fought Tywin to a standstill, but greater storms than lions and wolves were gathering. Snow fell thick across the Riverlands, turning fields into white seas and roads into frozen traps. For Tywin Lannister, it was an annoyance. For Robb Stark, it was an ally. The young wolf had grown wiser, and now he let the winter fight beside him. His men moved through the snow like shadows, born to the cold, while the lions stumbled and froze in their golden armor. Yet for all his victories, Robb knew this war could not drag on forever. Every month stretched his men thinner, every raid drained his stores. Tywin had gold enough to buy grain, armor, and sellswords, until the world itself froze. Robb's strength was fire, bright, fierce, but at risk of burning out too soon. One night in Riverrun Solar, Robb gathered his closest lords, the Blackfish, Great Jon Umber, and Edmure Tully. The map of Westeros lay between them, cluttered with carved pieces for castles and armies. Catelyn watched silently from the corner, her face half lit by firelight. "Striking at his soldiers won't be enough," Robb said. His voice was steady but sharp. "We must strike at his pride." At the heart of his power, the Blackfish leaned forward. "You mean Casterly Rock?" The room fell silent. No one had dared speak it aloud before. "Yes," Robb said. "Tywin thinks himself untouchable, hidden in his rock of gold. But if we strike there, if we show him his own walls can bleed, his legend shatters. His men will see the lion is not invincible. Edmure frowned nervously. "But Casterly Rock is leagues away across hostile lands. Even if we march, the Lannisters would crush us before we reach it." Robb shook his head. "Not by land. By sea." At that, the Blackfish's eyes narrowed. "The Ironborn," Robb nodded. "Balon Greyjoy is dead, and his daughter Yara seeks to prove herself. If we can turn the Ironborn from raiding our shores to striking the Lannisters, we gain ships. With ships, we strike the rock." The room erupted into argument. The Umbers cursed the very thought of trusting Ironborn. Edmure worried it was madness. But Robb held firm. "I do not trust them either," Robb admitted. "But if I can use their axes to cut into Tywin's heart, I will. The North remembers, but the Rock must remember as well." Reluctantly, his council agreed. A raven was sent to Pike, offering Yara Greyjoy spoils and recognition if she sailed with Stark banners to raid the western coast. But Robb was not blind. He knew this gamble could cost him dearly. As he waited for Yara's reply, he also turned northward, strengthening Winterfell's hold. Ravens came with good news. The castle's walls were mended, the forges roaring, the Manderleys feeding the armies with their great stores of grain. The North was alive again, and with each day more men swore fealty. Then came the reply from Pike. Yara Greyjoy herself had written, her words sharp as salt and steel. She would not bend knee, she said, but she would sail for gold and glory. If the young wolf wanted her sails, he would grant her plunder from the lion's den itself. Robb smiled grimly when he read the words. "So be it," he said. "Let her take her share, as long as she strikes where I command." By Spring's Edge the plan was set. While Tywin's armies roamed the Riverlands, Robb marched west with a chosen host, swift, hardened men who could ride and fight without supply trains. In secret, he met Yara Greyjoy's fleet off the coast of Fair Isle. The Ironborn were rough, their loyalty thin, but they thirsted for battle. For the first time, wolves and krakens fought side by side. Together, they sailed south under cover of night, their oars silent, their sails black against the waves. Casterly Rock loomed like a mountain of gold and stone, unbroken for thousands of years. No army had ever breached it. Tywin had built his pride on that truth. But in the dead of night, Robb Stark struck. Ironborn ships set fire to the rock's harbour, their flames painting the cliffs red. Northern raiders scaled hidden paths along the shore, guided by fishermen loyal to House Stark. Grey Wind prowled among them, his eyes gleaming in the dark. When dawn broke, smoke rose from the lion's den. Robb himself led the charge into the outer harbour, cutting down Lannister guards who had never dreamed wolves would come so far south. Yara's longships rained fire, and her men carried off gold and food in heaps. The rock itself did not fall. It was too strong for that. But the message was clear. The Lannisters were not safe, not even in their golden home. Robb left the cliffs burning, his banners flying high where lions once ruled. The raid echoed across the realm like thunder. In taverns from dawn to the wall, men whispered that the young wolf had torn at the very heart of the lion. Some laughed, some cursed, but all remembered. In King's Landing, Tywin's fury was unlike anything the city had seen. He smashed goblets against walls, tore maps from tables, and swore vengeance so deep even Cersei grew pale. "He has touched my rock," Tywin spat. "For this, I will salt the north until no wolf ever howls again." Yet Robb was already gone, sailing back north before Tywin's legions could trap him. His raid was not a conquest, it was a wound. And wounds, he knew, could fester. Back in Winterfell, when he told his mother of the strike, Catelyn stared at him with both fear and pride. "You have made yourself a legend," she said. "But legends burn as quickly as they rise. Do not forget that, Robb." He did not forget. In his heart, he knew Tywin's wrath would come like a storm. But he also knew something else. He was no longer just a boy leading an army. He was a king who had made lions bleed, and the North remembered. Winterfell's fires burned bright, but in Robb Stark's heart he felt the chill of the storm to come. Word of the raid on Casterly Rock had flown across the realm like wildfire. Some called it madness, others called it genius, but none could deny its effect. The lion had been wounded, its pride torn, and Tywin Lannister would not forgive. Ravens brought grim tidings. The Lannisters had rallied allies. The Reach had sent men, their banners of roses marching beside lions. Gold poured into sellswords' purses, swelling Tywin's forces to tens of thousands. The Frey remnants, humiliated but not broken, pledged their knives for revenge. An army unlike any seen in years now moved northward, a tide of steel and fire. Robb stood with his council in Winterfell's great hall. Maps lay spread before them, tokens marking enemy movements. The Blackfish spoke grimly. "Tywin comes not just for war. He comes to end you, Robb, to end the North." Great John Umber slammed his fist. "Then let him try. We'll break his host as we did the Frys." But Robb's eyes were steady, not reckless. "This is not the Frys, Great John. This is Tywin Lannister with all his strength. If we meet him in open battle, his numbers will crush us. We must fight on our terms, not his." His mother studied him quietly. She saw how much he had changed. The boy who once longed for glory now spoke with the calm steel of his father. And so, Robb chose not to face Tywin head-on. He chose the North itself as his weapon. When the lions marched across the neck, they found roads vanished into swamps, bridges broken, supplies stolen in the night. When they crossed into the Wolfswood, shadows stalked them. Northern archers melted into trees, loosing arrows and vanishing before horns could sound. Wolves howled in the dark, spooking horses and men alike. Winter was closing in, and the land belonged to the Starks. Still, Tywin pressed on. His men were fed with southern grain, his camps ordered with ruthless precision. Each ambush cost him, but his numbers held. Slowly, surely, he drove toward Winterfell. The final stand came not in the open fields, but in the snows before the castle's blackened walls. Winterfell had been reforged as a fortress of ice and fire, its gates strengthened, its towers manned with northern bowmen. Behind those walls, the North had gathered. Umbers, Karstarks, Manderleys, every bannerman who still remembered their oaths. The day Tywin arrived, the sky itself seemed to bleed grey. Snow fell heavy, muffling the sound of drums as the lions encircled the castle. From the battlements, Robb looked down at the sea of crimson and gold. His breath misted in the air, but his voice was firm. "They come to end us," he said, his words carrying to every man at his side. "Let them try." The North remembers. The battle that followed was like no other. Lannister rams thundered against the gates, but boiling oil and rolling stones met them. Siege towers crawled forward, only to be set aflame by fire arrows. When ladders rose, Northerners cut them down, sending screaming men into the snow. Grey wind leapt along the walls, tearing at any who dared climb. His howls echoed like a war horn of the old gods. For 3 days the siege raged. Tywin's numbers dwindled, but his fury never broke. On the 4th day, he launched his full assault. Every man, every engine of war, thrown against Winterfell's walls. It was chaos. The gates cracked under the weight. Lannister men poured into the courtyard, steel clashing with steel. Robb fought at the front, his sword flashing, grey wind at his side. He cut through night after night, his cloak torn, his armor dented, but his will unbroken. At last, in the heart of the storm, Robb and Tywin faced one another. The old lion, still fierce though aged, met the young wolf with cold eyes. "You have brought fire and blood upon your house, boy," Tywin said. "You think yourself a king, but you are only prey prolonging the hunt." Robb's blade was steady. "And you think yourself a lion, but lions bleed like any beast." Steel met steel. The clash was brutal, neither giving quarter. Tywin's strength was cunning, control, precision. Robb's was fury, speed, and the raw fire of youth. Around them men fought and died, but for a moment the battle seemed to pause, all eyes drawn to the duel of wolf and lion. In the end, Robb drove Tywin back, a cut slashing across the old lion's arm. Tywin stumbled, his sword slipping in the snow. Before Robb could strike the killing blow, horns sounded across the field. The Vale had arrived. At last, Lisa Arryn had been stirred from her hiding. Her Knights of the Vale sweeping down from the hills, steel shining in the snow. The Lannisters, caught between castle and fresh cavalry, broke. Panic spread. Lions fled, trampled, cut down. When the sun set, the fields before Winterfell were a graveyard of red and gold. Tywin Lannister's great host was shattered, his power broken in the snow. The North had won. Robb stood among the dead, his breath ragged, his sword heavy in his hand. He had faced betrayal, ruin, and fire. He had faced Tywin himself, and still he stood. Yet as the wind howled and the snow fell thicker, Robb looked northward. Beyond the wall, shadows moved, whispers of an older, colder enemy than lions or krakens. He thought of Jon, alone among the watch. He thought of Arya and Sansa, scattered. He thought of his father's words, "Winter is coming." The war of wolves and lions had ended in the North's triumph. But Robb Stark knew the greatest war was still to come, and this time it would not be fought for crowns or castles. It would be fought for the living.